All right, and now for the final objective in perception and the perceptual process. So we were kind of leading up to this, right? We said perception of oneself. We talk about perception of others. And overall, we said perception is that interpretation of reality, not reality itself. Of course, we can make certain errors, as you probably have noticed. You would have probably noticed as we went through some of the explanations before in self-perception and other or person perception, okay? So there are a number of biases. We can kind of break them down into biases that tend to be common in interviews and performance appraisals. These are biases that can happen in general as well, but they're very common in interviews and performance appraisals. Then we have, let me just go back to it, right? Right. Yeah, the interview, of course, is one of the most common organizational selection devices. Most organizations use them. Of course, interviews are far from accurate because of these very perceptual biases that take place. And the two common biases would be contrast effects as well as rater errors that tend to occur during these types of assessments. And then we have biases that can occur in the workplace, such as stereotyping, reliance on central traits, projection, implicit personality theory, and primacy and recency effect. So I wanted to get first into the ones that are more common in interviews. And we have something known as a contrast effect or contrast error. We'll take a look at the image together to understand it clearly, okay? And this is one that, of course, I think you'll probably realize. The perception of heightened or diminished difference between candidates when juxtaposed, right? Or when one immediately follows the other. So, for instance, here we see, let's look at the left side of the diagram. On the axis, first of all, we have poor performance versus excellent performance, just like in an interview or performance appraisal. And then on the sorry, this is y-axis. On the x-axis, we have just the applicant order, okay? So the y-axis, rating, x-axis, applicant order, right? Oh, this code is so frustrating. It has me so miserable. Okay, so let's see. We have 3 candidates come into an interview. Which one do you want to use, interview or performance appraisal? Let's use an interview, okay? I know many of you are of the age where you'll soon be going for a job, and you could probably relate more to an interview than perhaps the evening class, and I know could relate perhaps more to the performance appraisal, or both, right? So let's use that interview. Suppose three persons come into that interview, and the first 3 persons perform at an excellent level. The 4th person comes into that interview and performs at an average level, right? That's the actual performance. But the 4th person is perceived, which is different, right? At performing at a somewhat of a poor level. Why do you think that there's a discrepancy between how the interviewers perceived the performance of the 4th person versus the actual performance of the 4th person? What do you think accounted for that discrepancy? So I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, and I'll give you the answer. Well, before I give you the answer, let's look at the second example. Suppose 3 persons came into a performance appraisal. So they came for a performance appraisal, the immediate supervisor is conducting a performance appraisal, and these first 3 candidates all performed at a poor level. So the immediate supervisor used some kind of rubric and said, well, okay, perform at a poor level, poor level, poor level. But the 4th person came in and performed at an average level. However, the immediate supervisor perceived that 4th person who performed at an average level, that immediate supervisor perceived that 4th employee as performing at a high, excellent level instead. Again, what do you think accounted for that difference between the immediate supervisor's perception of the employee's performance and the actual employee's performance, that difference there? You should probably, I think most of you would probably get it. It has to do with, of course, contrasting. What we said is the definition, right? Contrasting or juxtaposing the 3 that came before with the 4th employee. And that happened in both cases, right? So in the first case, the interviewer was comparing the 4th candidates to the first 3. And because the first 3 performed at such an excellent level, when the 4th candidate performed at an average level, the interviewer committed the contrast error if they perceive that candidate as performing at a poor level. Similarly, the immediate supervisor, after seeing the first 3 employees performing at such a poor level, when the 4th employee performed at an average level, the immediate supervisor was like, wow, this is spectacular. You perform at such an excellent level. Then what he's doing is comparing that 4th employee to the previous 3 rather than on his own merit. And that creates that discrepancy, that contrast error, because he's contrasting that employee with the previous 3 employees, which leads to that inflated perception of the employee's performance. Okay, that's the contrast error. Right away, you realize that it's obviously a bias and can affect persons' evaluations. It does all of the time. Certainly can affect how supervisors evaluate employees, how interviewers evaluate candidates, and so on. Okay, especially when they occur in the same day or within a short time frame. Certainly, the contrast error, we are more susceptible to committing that contrast error. The second bias is called rater errors. And here we see that persons can sometimes commit different types of rater errors, harshness, or let's look at leniency. Leniency, if you know about the curve, right, the normal curve. On the y-axis, we have number of employees. On the x-axis, we have performance, right? Typically, we know that employees perform along the blue area, which would be, a normal curve. And we see that, few employees perform very poorly, few employees perform at that highest level, most performing around the average level. That's how performance tends to occur. That's how candidates are typically for interviews as well. But if we are rating in a lenient fashion, we might find that most the ratings that we tend to give tend to be good ratings. And here we obviously being too lenient, committing the leniency error. Harshness error is the opposite, where we tend to be too harsh and give the majority of employees a poor performance. Central tendency is when we avoid extreme ratings of skills, and then everybody performs at an average level, almost everybody, right? A good example to understand this, of course, besides interviews and performance appraisals, could be, for an example, let's say you did an exam for OB and 80% of students got C's. That could be an error of central tendency, right? Where the rater avoided giving extremely high and extremely low marks. So let's say 80 to 90% of you all scored C's, then it would look something like the central tendency error. If 80 to 90% of you scored A's, then chances are I committed a leniency error. If 80 to 90% of you scored F's, then chances are or D's or whatever, then chances are I committed the harshness error. More than likely, performance would tend to fall somewhere close to that blue curve, all right? But we can commit a number of the other errors when rating employees. So just to be aware of it, right? And I'll talk about that after. Another bias is the stereotyping bias. And we all know about it. I just posted a nice image here where we have a sort of overgeneralized belief about a particular group or class of people, okay? This overgeneralized belief about them. So as you can see in the image here, there are some gender discrimination taking place where we tend to stereotype men as being weightlifters, fixing things with tools, into trucks. They like money and they're very ambitious, make up some money and profits, and they're into tech, right? When in fact, I have one student from IT in the class right now, and it's a girl, right? I said that like if I was having a girl, right? It's a girl, all right. And then of course, girls being associated with art. I loved art. I was so into art, right? What do you call this? Martinis, lipstick. I'm really not, I don't drink enough alcohol to remember. Flowers, settling down in a house, makeup, arts, loving, I guess, eyelashes. I don't know what I mean. Queen, princess, maybe, I don't know. The point is that we tend to engage in this sort of categorical thinking. We distinguish some category of people like gender, biological gender, men versus women. It could be any group of people. It could be a religious group. It could be a group of people at an organization, like UB lecturers, for instance. We could be people with lower back tattoos. And the reason I say that because typically we use the tattoo game. And I know that one has created some sort of stereotypical thinking before, right? So we distinguish some group of people. And what we tend to do at that point is engage in this homogenization process, where we assume that individuals in these categories have certain traits, just like the men versus the woman, right? Or we might assume UB lecturers, we might start to assume that they have certain traits such as being helpful and knowledgeable, right? Kind, empathetic, right? Okay. Then we typically engage in some sort of differentiation process where we perceive that everyone in our category possesses these traits. So that's where we assume that every UB lecturer is helpful, knowledgeable, empathetic. Every guy is into trucks and so on. Whereas we might attribute less favorable attributes to contrasting groups. So women are more into flowers and painting, which might seem less attractive in some ways, right? Although I don't see why it should be. But we might say, for instance, all UB lecturers are helpful, knowledgeable, and so on, whereas lecturers from some other institution aren't, okay? Or we might say that all persons with lower back tattoos are promiscuous. Maybe they are the girls and sugar we were talking about earlier. Maybe maybe they already anyway. Whereas those who don't have lower back tattoos, those who have tattoos on their arms are much cooler on the back. So these are some of the stereotypes. The tattoo one is one that actually came up in a previous class, but these are some of the stereotypes you can engage in. So the age stereotypes, race stereotypes, ethnic stereotypes. We know of these in our country. Of course, we have very vivid examples. The age stereotypes, of course, in addition to gender, and so on. So we of course, we're just highlighting what stereotypes are all about, and these, of course, can create biases. The next bias is that of reliance on central traits. These are characteristics of particular interest to the perceiver. So, to give you an example, research has shown us that conventionally attractive people are more likely than unattractive people to be hired, right? To be given good performance evaluations, which you were just thinking, and to be promoted. There's even one study showing that for every extra inch in height, persons earned an additional $600 in salary. What does that tell us? It tells us, therefore, that interviewers were relying on a central trait, which is physical appearance, to form an impression of people. Again, you should see the biases involved. You should see that this is clearly a bias because height is unrelated to performance, okay? At least in the work context. I'm not talking about basketball or some physical sport or something, right? Unrelated to work performance in general in most work contexts, okay? Even physical appearance, maybe that might be related to performance in a modeling career, but not in a typical corporate context, okay? So these are some of the central traits that people tend to rely on. It can be very specific to an individual. Remember, we spoke about individuals' perceptions based on their own experiences, their own needs, their own characteristics, traits, and so on. So it really depends on the person. But these are just some of the more conventional ones that we found from research, okay? Projection is pretty straightforward, but has serious implications, of course. The tendency for perceivers to attribute their own thoughts and feelings to others. And I think this is one that I certainly commit, and I know many of you do as well, because it's an efficient way of thinking, that if we have similar backgrounds and interests, that we might do and think, feel similarly, we might think similarly, and so on. So if I meet a fellow video gamer in class, I might immediately start a project. I know I might do that. I might say, well, you're a gamer, all right, man. You're immediately cool. You gain cool points. I probably start to think that you're ambitious, you're nerdy, and all these things. Nerdy is a good thing. And that might be true. When we use the tattoo example, persons who select similar type tattoos may have similar thoughts and feelings, right? So yeah, it can be an efficient way of thinking, but it can also lead to difficulties and bias, right? Of course, there's a good example in one of the books I read where there was this honest warehouse manager who's very honest, high integrity, and so on. He tended to perceive others as being honest like himself. So when the this honest warehouse manager realized that stock went missing, he was in shock. Couldn't believe it. He couldn't understand it. Why would stock go missing? You know, I am honest. My employees are honest. Nobody would steal from me. That kind of mindset. Obviously, he missed certain cues because he was blinded by his projection. And that's why that bias can blind us to certain true characteristics of others because we project our own onto others. So think about how that has impacted your life, because I'm sure you can find some examples where you've projected your own thoughts and feelings onto others, which has blinded you from seeing the true version of that person. Implicit personality theories. Oh, I shouldn't show you this. Let me look at it a bit. The next one I'm going to go on to is implicit personality theories. And that is personal suppositions people have about which characteristics go together. So I want you, on the next image that I raise, to quickly follow up these, right? Usually in class, it's a lot easier to do because I can guarantee you'll do it quickly. I don't want you to pause. I just want you to answer quickly, okay? So let's go. Quickly in both. John is energetic, eager, and which one would you say? Julie is unintelligent, boring, and Joe is handsome, tall, and Jane is attractive, intelligent, and in most cases, when we do this, persons complete these sentences in a way where they perceive certain personality characteristics to go together. All right. So you might say John is energetic, eager, and intelligent. Julie's unintelligent, boring, and fat, because you might assume that these are undesirable characteristics. Joe is handsome, tall, and muscular. Jane is attractive, intelligent, and likable. So people tend to have these suppositions about which personality characteristics go together, and therefore that can create biases. This is very similar to when we raise the point about halo effect, the rating where persons have this rating of an individual on one characteristic, and it tends to color their ratings on other traits and characteristics. So if, for instance, you perceive somebody, your friend, as being handsome, right? Maybe it's more than just a friend in that case. Okay. Maybe if you perceive your friend as being energetic, or just this person that you've just met, you say, wow, that person is energetic and eager. They must also be intelligent, right? That is not necessarily the case. You have this kind of model in your mind that these characteristics go together, when in reality they may not. Okay. You may think about in interacting with lecturers in the past, or teachers or educators. You may often have a strict educator, whether it be a lecturer or teacher, and assume, well, okay, the person is strict. They might also be unapproachable. The two seem to go hand in hand to you, maybe, right? And therefore, you may fear asking questions in a course. However, the person might just be strict, appear strict in class, but is very receptive to questions outside of class. And I actually had a case like this, where I had a lecturer in undergrad when I was in where you're sitting right now, and seemed very strict in class. But after class, when I asked a question about something, the lecturer was very receptive and helpful about the answering the questions. Even sat me down in the office and say, hey, let's go through this and see if you have run into any problems. Very, very helpful, very approachable outside of class. So we have to be very careful about how we form impressions according to different personalities, how we group these characteristics together to form impressions of people and committing that halo effect. The opposite, which I was perhaps just describing, is something like the Horns effect, where we tend to group together. We tend to assume that if a person has one bad characteristic, they have a number of bad characteristics, right? So if, for instance, the lecturer is strict, is also unapproachable, grouchy, a beast, right? Whatever other kind of characters come up with. That would be the Horns effect, okay? The final bias we had is primacy and recency effects. So primacy effect is reliance on early cues to form an impression of a person. There's a really nice demonstration I wanted to do in class, but we can just explain it. It's straightforward enough anyway. So if for instance, primacy, relying on early cues, if for instance you were I gave this question in an exam. Or let's say I did this as a pop quiz, and I said, hey guys, name the quadrilaterals here. And somebody gave me this. They named the quadrilateral Bob, they named this one Sam, Teddyson, let's see what I name. Keith and Harry, I guess. All right. So you name them like that. And if I relied on this really cute to form an impression of that person, I might say, well, this person is very smart, right? Of course, that can be a simple misinterpretation because I did say name, I didn't, and a pair's name as well. So perhaps you made some association, and perhaps you might actually be very smart for making that association and then naming them, right? I didn't say name the quadrilateral using these instructions, perhaps weren't clear. So if I rely on these early cues to form an impression of you over the time that I know you, I could be creating a bias. In fact, in my early career, a student came into my office, and this is a good example of primacy effect. On the very first week of class, to ask a question with his friend. And what he did is he knocked down the office plant I had at the time. And let's not talk about that office plant because I don't have it anymore. Somebody stole it from me, but that's another story. We'll talk about that when we get back face to face, okay? So he knocked on my office plant, beautiful plant, by the way, and fake, but beautiful. And he, his friend said, hey, you know, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to get off on the wrong foot with the lecturer? What the friend thought is that I might perhaps commit primacy error, meaning that I might perceive based on this early interaction, this early cue from this student that he knocked on my plans, that he's careless, you know, perhaps reckless, and he's disorganized, chaotic. I might start to commit the Horn's effect along with, because these biases don't usually occur one at a time, right? They might occur all together. So I might be committing the primacy error, relying on this early cue. When he said get off on the wrong foot, meaning relying on this early cue to form an impression of that student over the rest of the semester. I might say that's clearly the primacy effect, right? I would say Horn's effect would say he's careless, therefore he's reckless and disorganized. That's committing Horn's effect. But the primacy effect would mean if I continue to do that throughout the semester and assume he is like that throughout the semester because of that early interaction. Okay. The opposite is recency effect, and that means when I rely on the most, if we rely on the most recent cues to form an impression of a person. So you can probably think about interactions with people. Let's say you've interacted with somebody for a few years, and then in your last interaction, you had an unfriendly encounter, or the person was acting a bit strange. You might start to rely on that very recent interaction to form your impression of the person and say, well, maybe I missed certain things before. Maybe this person was always, let's see, bad. Let's just use bad. I don't want to say anything really bad. Dishonest. Maybe this person was always dishonest and I just missed all the signs. Or maybe they were always rude or grouchy or moody or something, right? Neurotic. But I just missed that all along. So you rely on the most recent interaction to then perhaps reframe your perception of that overall person because you committed a recency effect, when it may very well be that the person was just having a bad day or something else. Okay, it doesn't have to be accurate. So overall, as you can realize, right, overall, we are susceptible to a number of biases, not just in interviews and performance appraisals, but in general. So this makes us prone to committing a number of errors in the workplace. And of course, there are a number of strategies we can use to improve the likelihood that we reduce these biases. One of the first steps is actually just to be aware of them. So what we're doing here today via this hopefully informative session, by highlighting the biases to you, it takes them perhaps from your subconscious to your conscious. Now that you're more aware of it, you will look out for them more. So training programs geared towards reducing biases often increase awareness of the biases in the first place to help persons reduce the likelihood of committing those biases. Of course, there are some specific strategies you can use for certain biases. Things like devil's advocates, advisors, and so on, teams and different things. But for the most part, increasing awareness is one of those strategies we can use. So that, in a nutshell, is perception. We covered three main objectives: how you perceive yourself, right? I can't go back to that. All right, let me just zoom out a bit. How you perceive yourself, how you perceive others, right? So yourself, big yellow question mark, red question mark, so you perceive others, or that's more orange, I guess. I'm colorblind. I did say I was colorblind. And I love that, right? And the perceptual biases that occur when you try to perceive others, or try to interpret others, I should say. Those biases that can occur, right? So, of course, you then see how it fits into the overall model. And that is something we said at the beginning, that your perception can influence your motivation and so on. But most importantly, everything translates into your individual behavior and results. All right. So that's the end of the session. At the end of each subtopic of video, you would have seen that I posted some questions. I hope you are completing them. I will be reviewing them, and I will send an announcement regarding the next week. Okay, so I will stop the recording. Have a good one. Take care.